Imagine a world perpetually pinned to the earth, not by the inescapable laws of gravity, but by a very rational, deeply ingrained terror of a single, fraying rope. Before the middle of the 19th century, the dream of touching the clouds was anchored firmly to the ground by fear. To ascend a building using a mechanical hoist was to engage in a terrifying gamble with one's own life, a risk few were willing to take. Mid-19th century cities were expanding at a furious pace, but they were spreading strictly outward, devouring surrounding landscapes. Vertical travel was entirely reliant on rudimentary platforms used strictly for hauling heavy cargo. These primitive elevators were suspended by simple hemp ropes that degraded quickly under harsh industrial conditions. If that singular line snapped under the immense strain, a catastrophic, lethal freefall was the absolute, unavoidable outcome, shattering cargo and lives alike. This primal fear of plummeting to the earth dictated the fundamental architecture of the era, effectively capping the ambition of builders. Commercial and residential structures rarely exceeded 5 or 6 stories in height. This arbitrary limit represented the absolute maximum altitude a human being could comfortably climb using a traditional staircase without succumbing to sheer physical exhaustion, leaving the sky entirely out of reach for human habitation or grand commercial enterprise. The upper floors of these low-slung, heavy masonry structures were punishing, highly undesirable spaces, often suffocating beneath the radiant heat of the roof. They were reserved almost exclusively for domestic servants, struggling artists, and the poorest citizens who simply could not afford the supreme luxury of the easily accessible ground floor. To live high above the cobblestone streets was a definitive mark of poverty, not of prestige, a physical manifestation of societal cast-offs. Elisha Otis did not initially set out to reshape the modern skyline or invert the social hierarchy of urban real estate. Born in rural Vermont, he was a restless, intensely pragmatic master mechanic. He was a man who solved immediate, heavy-duty problems with grease, iron, and a profound intuitive understanding of physical forces, rather than a visionary architect dreaming of crystalline towers piercing the clouds. But his ingenuity would enable exactly that. By 1852, this master mechanic found himself managing a bustling bedstead factory in Yonkers, New York. The company desperately needed to expand its production capacity, tasking Otis with clearing out an abandoned, multi-story sawmill located nearby. To effectively utilize the upper levels of the dilapidated building, he faced a severe logistical nightmare that required moving massive, incredibly heavy milling machinery upward through the cavernous, unstable structure. He needed to haul this vital equipment to the highest floors, but the existing hoisting apparatus available in the old mill was a terrifying death trap waiting to spring. Otis watched his workmen risk their lives every time they loaded the precarious wooden platform, acutely aware that a single frayed fiber in the aging hoisting rope could send the entire payload crashing violently into the basement, a risk that weighed heavily on his conscience. Otis refused to accept the rigid binary nature of the traditional hoist, where an intact rope meant temporary survival and a severed rope guaranteed absolute destruction. He recognized that the fundamental flaw was relying entirely on the integrity of a single, highly vulnerable point of failure. He needed to conceptualize an autonomous fail-safe, a brilliant mechanism that could outpace human reaction time during a sudden, catastrophic disaster. His ultimate solution was breathtakingly simple, born from years of observing how mechanical tension could be manipulated and controlled. He acquired a heavy, highly resilient wagon spring, a curved piece of thick, tempered steel traditionally used to absorb the brutal shocks of horse-drawn carriages on rough roads. He securely mounted this robust spring directly across the top wooden beam of the elevator platform, creating a bow of immense latent energy. Standard engineering of the day focused obsessively on making the hoisting ropes thicker and stronger, a brute force approach that merely delayed the inevitable and still left ample room for catastrophic material fatigue. The prevailing wisdom assumed that the absolute only way to prevent a deadly fall was to prevent the rope from breaking in the first place, an impossible guarantee in a harsh industrial environment where wear and tear were constant companions. Otis brilliantly inverted the entire problem, looking past the mere strength of the rope to the underlying physics of the fall itself. He designed an ingenious safety brake system that weaponized the very loss of tension that caused the terrifying descent. He decided to use the catastrophic failure of the rope as the precise mechanical trigger for the platform's immediate and automatic salvation, turning gravity against itself. The main hoisting rope pulled forcefully upward on the very center of the steel wagon spring, keeping it tightly bowed and under constant, immense tension. Along the inner walls of the elevator shaft, running the entire vertical length of the building, he installed parallel wooden guide rails heavily lined with deep, jagged iron teeth, creating a continuous track of potential stopping points that stretched from the ground to the roof. As long as the hoisting rope held firm, the upward pull kept the bowed spring contracted and safely clear of the menacing teeth, allowing the platform to glide smoothly between the floors. But if that vital rope ever snapped, the upward tension would instantly vanish into thin air, entirely removing the restraining force that kept the heavy steel spring tightly bowed and safely tucked away. This sudden loss of tension would cause the heavy spring to violently snap back into its natural flattened shape with explosive force. This immediate flattening action would instantaneously drive heavy metal dogs, securely attached to the outer ends of the spring, directly into the jagged iron teeth of the guide rails, locking the entire platform firmly and immovably in place within a fraction of a terrifying second. Otis built his initial prototype in the Yonkers factory, and the autonomous mechanism worked flawlessly, catching the heavy platform every single time the rope was released. Yet, surprisingly, the industrial world responded to this monumental breakthrough with deafening indifference. He managed to sell only a handful of basic freight elevators, his revolutionary safety brake largely ignored by a deeply skeptical and inherently fearful public unwilling to trust it. Frustrated, financially strained, and nearly destitute, the brilliant mechanic was on the verge of abandoning the elevator business entirely to try his luck joining the lucrative gold rush out in California. He slowly realized that a purely technical solution, no matter how elegant or demonstrably reliable in a workshop, was completely insufficient to change the deeply entrenched habits and primal anxieties of an entire industrial society. He needed to conquer the psychological barrier, the deep-seated, visceral terror of falling that no intricate patent drawing or quiet factory demonstration could ever erase from the public mind. He needed a grand spectacle, a visceral, undeniable display of absolute confidence that would definitively shatter the paralyzing fear holding back his invention and, by extension, the entire future of urban architecture. The perfect stage for this audacious gamble presented itself in 1854 at the Exhibition of the Industry of All Nations. This monumental event was housed within the magnificent New York Crystal Palace, a towering sunlit cathedral constructed entirely of shimmering glass and intricate ironwork, specifically designed to showcase the most awe-inspiring technological wonders of the rapidly accelerating modern age to a marveling public. Otis secured a prominent exhibition space right in the center of the main hall and constructed a massive, open-sided elevator shaft that reached toward the vaulted glass ceiling. This was not a quiet, peer-reviewed demonstration for academic engineers. It was high-stakes theatrical engineering, a deliberate, highly calculated setup designed specifically to confront humanity's primal fear of heights head-on in front of thousands of witnesses. He loaded the open wooden platform with heavy, imposing wooden crates to visually emphasize the immense weight of the payload. Then he stepped aboard himself, wearing a fine tailored suit and a distinguished top hat, and calmly ordered his hoist operator to pull him high above the crowded, bustling exhibition floor, completely exposing his own life to the deadly drop below in a breathtaking display of supreme confidence. A massive crowd of onlookers quickly gathered around the base of the towering shaft, their necks craned upward, murmuring in a potent mixture of intense anticipation and genuine dread. They watched in absolute silence as a lone, sharply dressed man was suspended in midair by a single, taut rope, blatantly defying the very laws of survival they had always known to be true since the dawn of civilization. At the dizzying apex of the ascent, with the tension in the room thick enough to cut, Otis dramatically signaled his assistant standing on the platform frame above. The assistant stepped forward, wielding a heavy, sharpened axe, and, with a violent, sweeping swing, slashed completely through the thick hoisting rope, entirely severing the single, fragile lifeline holding the daring inventor aloft above the unforgiving exhibition floor. The thousands of spectators gasped in collective visceral horror as the heavy platform instantly plummeted downward, fully expecting to witness a gruesome and inevitable tragedy unfolding right before their horrified eyes. The terrifying nightmare of the snapping rope, the very fear that had kept cities close to the dirt for centuries, was suddenly playing out in real time under the glass roof. But the agonizing fall lasted only a fraction of a heartbeat. With a deafening, metallic crunch that echoed loudly through the crystal halls, the heavy wagon spring explosively snapped flat. The iron dogs bit viciously and deeply into the jagged guide rails, sending a violent shudder through the entire wooden structure as the plummeting platform ground to a sudden, absolute, dead halt in midair. Standing firmly on the suspended platform, entirely unharmed and supremely confident in his mechanical masterpiece, Elisha Otis looked down at the stunned, breathless crowd below. He calmly doffed his top hat, bowed deeply with the dramatic flair of a seasoned showman, and shouted the immortal words that would forever alter the trajectory of modern architecture. "All safe, gentlemen, all safe." That single, unforgettable moment of high-stakes theatrical bravado exorcised the ancient demon of the snapping rope once and for all. The safety brake was no longer an obscure mechanical concept hidden away in a dusty Yonkers factory. It was a proven, undeniable guardian of human life, personally witnessed and loudly verified by the awestruck masses of New York City. This newfound absolute trust initiated a profound architectural revolution that completely inverted urban real estate economics. For centuries, the wealthy had lived on the lowest floors to avoid exhausting climbs, leaving the sweltering top floors to the marginalized. The safety elevator flipped this historical hierarchy entirely upside down, transforming the highest, most isolated reaches of a building into the most coveted, expensive property, giving birth to the modern penthouse. The timing of this psychological breakthrough was extraordinarily serendipitous. Just as Otis was perfecting safe vertical transport, industrial metallurgists were perfecting the Bessemer process for the mass production of incredibly strong steel. These two distinct innovations, one of safe vertical motion, one of revolutionary structural material, were hurtling toward a monumental convergence that would forever change the face of the earth and push humanity upward. Heavy masonry walls could only support a building up to 10 or 12 stories before the base became impractically thick, consuming all available ground space. Steel framing offered the incredible structural strength to build infinitely higher, but without a safe, reliable way to ascend those dizzying heights, those towering steel skeletons were practically useless. The safety brake was the vital, missing link that unlocked the sky. Within a few short decades, the skylines of New York and Chicago erupted upward in a frantic, unprecedented race to the clouds. Architects were suddenly unleashed from the exhausting tyranny of the staircase, free to design awe-inspiring structures that literally scraped the heavens. None of these towering cathedrals of modern commerce could exist without the fundamental assurance provided by that simple, ratcheting wagon spring. Today, millions of people step into enclosed steel boxes suspended hundreds, even thousands of feet in the air, completely unbothered by the sheer, deadly drop lingering just beneath their feet. We casually press a glowing button and seamlessly ascend into the heavens, entirely taking for granted the audacious ingenuity and theatrical bravery that first made such a miraculous vertical journey possible for the masses. Elisha Otis did not invent the concept of the elevator, nor did he design the first soaring skyscraper to pierce the clouds. But by conquering the primal, paralyzing terror of the fall, this pragmatic master mechanic forged the invisible psychological foundation upon which every modern vertical city is built. He proved that sometimes the most profound way to elevate humanity is simply to make them feel completely safe.